My husband asked for a divorce while eating dessert in the same restaurant where he proposed to me. He barely looked up from his phone when he said another woman made him happier. What he didn't know was that losing me would destroy everything he built. Welcome back to my channel, my revenge space. Meet Isabel as she bravely chose to walk away after years of emotional neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. If you enjoy emotional storytelling, dramatic life lessons, and satisfying endings, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Enjoy. 8 years. For 8 long years, I made myself smaller so my husband, Leo, could feel bigger. At first, I called it love, then sacrifice, then compromise. I told myself every marriage required adjustment, that if I just gave a little more, stayed quieter, tried harder, our relationship would survive. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly disappearing inside it. At 35, I had my awakening in the middle of an upscale restaurant while my husband casually asked for a divorce over dessert. Leo barely looked at me when he said it. His attention stayed fixed on his phone, thumbs moving as he texted someone, probably the woman already waiting to replace me. "Vanessa makes me happy, Isabel," he said flatly. "She understands me." Ironically, he chose the same restaurant where he proposed 8 years earlier. That wasn't accidental. Leo liked symbolism when it benefited him. He wanted a dramatic ending. He wanted tears, begging, humiliation. But as I stared across the candlelit table at the man who had emotionally abandoned me years ago, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The pain was there, yes. So was the humiliation. But underneath it was something lighter, almost freeing. For years, I'd been carrying our marriage alone. Now he was finally setting the weight down. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, let me introduce myself. My name is Isabel Morrison. I'm 35 years old, and until recently I thought surviving a marriage meant losing pieces of yourself quietly enough that nobody noticed. When people hear about divorce, they expect screaming matches, slammed doors, neighbors peeking through curtains wondering if they should call the police. But that wasn't us. Our marriage died slowly, silently. By the time the divorce came, the real tragedy had already happened years earlier. When Leo and I first married, we were equals. We lived in a tiny apartment downtown with unreliable plumbing and barely enough kitchen space for 2 people. We didn't have money, but we had plans. I still remember sitting on the floor eating cheap takeout pizza while sketching our future on the back of napkins. We promised we'd build everything together. I was an interior designer just starting to attract clients. Leo worked in finance and spent long nights trying to climb the corporate ladder. Back then, we listened to each other. We celebrated every tiny victory like it mattered. Then success arrived, but only for him. Leo's promotions came quickly, more money, bigger opportunities. Within a few years, we had a penthouse, luxury cars, designer furniture, the kind of life people envy online. From the outside, we looked perfect. Inside, I was slowly fading. The change started small enough to ignore. About 3 years into our marriage, I landed my first major project, a contract to redesign a boutique hotel. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed about for years. I bought a bottle of wine, cooked Leo's favorite dinner, and spent the evening rehearsing how I'd tell him. When he walked through the door, he was already on a call. He held up one finger without even looking at me, a silent command to stay quiet, and disappeared into his office. 2 hours passed. By the time he finally came out, dinner was cold. "I have good news," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I got the hotel contract." Leo barely glanced up from his plate. "That's nice, Isabel." He took another bite and added, "Don't forget to pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow. And Friday's dinner with the partners is important. Wear the black dress I like, not the floral one." My smile faltered. "Leo, did you hear what I said? The project is a huge step for my career." He sighed heavily, like I was exhausting him. Then he set down his fork and looked at me with thinly disguised irritation. "Isabel, I spent all day closing a multi-million-dollar deal. I really don't have the energy to discuss your little decorating hobbies right now. Can we just eat?" Hobbies, that's what he called my career. That was the first real crack. After that, the crack spread quickly. Over the years, I stopped being his partner and became an accessory, something polished he displayed beside him at corporate events. I stood beside him smiling while he talked. If I tried joining conversations, Leo would cut me off smoothly, resting a firm hand on my shoulder while redirecting attention back to himself. To everyone else, it looked affectionate. To me, it felt like control. Eventually, he stopped asking about my day altogether. He decided where we vacationed, what we bought, who we spent time with. He chose Aspen despite knowing I hated the cold. He repainted the living room gray even after I told him it made the space feel lifeless. Every decision became his decision. My 32nd birthday should have been the moment I fully understood what our marriage had become. I wanted something simple, just dinner together. Instead, Leo hosted a massive networking party at our penthouse for clients and executives. More than 50 people crowded our home, drinking expensive liquor and laughing loudly while waiters floated through the rooms with silver trays. I didn't know half the guests. Leo spent the night entertaining investors while I wandered through my own birthday party feeling invisible. At one point, I slipped into the kitchen alone and quietly cut myself a slice of birthday cake. Leo walked in moments later looking irritated. "What are you doing hiding in here?" he asked while filling an ice bucket. "It's my birthday," I said softly. He rolled his eyes. "Don't start being dramatic. This party is important for my image. Stop making everything about you." Then he walked away. I stood there surrounded by dirty dishes and melting ice, staring down at my untouched cake while laughter echoed from the next room. And for the first time, I truly understood something terrifying. To Leo, I wasn't a wife anymore. I was part of the decor. The emotional neglect wasn't sudden. That's what makes it dangerous. It happens so slowly you barely notice it at first. A dismissive comment here, a little less affection, a little less respect, until one day you wake up and realize you've become a ghost in your own life. I stopped voicing opinions because he dismissed them anyway. I stopped celebrating my achievements because he belittled them. I stopped fighting for attention because begging to be loved is its own kind of humiliation. For a long time, I thought invisibility was the worst thing that could happen to a marriage. I was wrong. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Sunday morning. The sky outside the penthouse windows was dark and heavy, rain slamming against the glass while Leo showered down the hall. He guarded his laptop obsessively. Passwords on everything. Angled screens whenever I walked by. I never questioned it. Maybe part of me didn't want confirmation of what I already suspected. But that morning, he made a mistake. He left the laptop open on the kitchen island. I was making coffee when a message notification appeared across the screen. "I miss you already. Last night was amazing. He doesn't deserve you." My hand froze around the spoon dot, it slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly against the counter. The shower still ran. Leo hadn't heard. I should have walked away. Instead, I stepped closer. The sender's name was Vanessa, his 24-year-old executive assistant. I remembered meeting her at the company Christmas party months earlier. Blonde hair, loud laugh, a smile that lingered just a little too long when she looked at me. Now I finally understood why. My pulse pounded as I scrolled upward through months of messages. It wasn't just sex. That would have hurt less. Leo told her things he hadn't told me in years, about work stress, about his childhood, about his fears, about dreams he once shared with me, and the worst part, he sounded alive when he spoke to her. Like the version of Leo I thought had disappeared years ago had simply been reserved for someone else. He told Vanessa things he hadn't told me in years. Then I saw my name. Leo. She's so boring, Vanessa. I come home and she just stares at me. No ambition. She's dead weight. Vanessa, you deserve someone who matches your fire, someone alive. Then another message appeared. Leo, I'm working on leaving her. I just need to protect my finances first. I'm not losing half my money. The blood drained from my face. My knees weakened so suddenly I had to grip the granite counter to stay upright. This wasn't just betrayal. It was dissection. He wasn't merely cheating on me, he was turning me into a joke. Reducing 8 years of marriage into a financial inconvenience he discussed with his mistress between hotel visits and late-night texts. Dead weight. After everything. After supporting him when he had nothing. After ironing his shirts before interviews, surviving ramen noodle years beside him, shrinking myself piece by piece so his ego could fill every room we entered. A wave of nausea rolled through me. For one wild second, I wanted to storm into the bathroom and hurl the laptop straight into the shower. But then something strange happened. The panic disappeared. The hurt cooled. And in its place came something far more dangerous. Clarity. A cold, steady calm spread through my chest like ice settling over water. I scrolled through the messages one last time, memorizing dates, hotel names, photographs. Photos taken in my car. Hotel rooms paid for through our joint account. It stopped feeling tragic after that. It became factual. Leo didn't love me. Worse, he didn't respect me. The marriage I'd been trying so desperately to save had already died. I'd simply been mourning alone. The shower turned off. I closed the messages quickly, wiped the counter clean, and poured coffee into 2 mugs just as Leo walked into the kitchen wearing only a towel. "Coffee's ready," I said calmly. Even I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Leo sat at the island and immediately checked his laptop. For one brief second, suspicion crossed his face. Then it vanished. He had no idea. "Thanks," he muttered without looking up. I took a sip of coffee. The heat burned my tongue, but somehow the pain grounded me. It reminded me I was still alive. "I'm heading to the gym," I said. "Fine," he replied distractedly. "Don't stay out too long. I need you to drop off a package later." Not please, never please. Just another task assigned to the woman he considered dead weight. "Okay," I said. Then I walked out of the penthouse for what I already knew would be the last time as his wife. I never went to the gym. Instead, I sat alone on a rain-soaked bench at a nearby park for nearly 2 hours, watching water ripple through the creek while people hurried past beneath umbrellas. I didn't cry. I planned. By the time I stood up, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The man I loved no longer existed, and the stranger wearing his face intended to strip me of my dignity before discarding me. I wasn't going to let him. The next morning, I waited until Leo left for work. Before stepping into the elevator, he kissed my cheek with the same detached routine someone might use to pat a dog on the head. "Don't forget to call the plumber," he said. Then the doors closed. The second they did, I moved. No screaming, no revenge scene, no dramatic confrontation with Vanessa. I didn't want chaos. I wanted freedom. At 10 o'clock, I sat across from a divorce attorney named Margaret Steele, a composed woman with silver-streaked hair and observant eyes sharp enough to notice every detail I tried hiding. I handed her a folder filled with screenshots, bank statements, and copies of transactions. Then I told her everything: the emotional neglect, the affairs, the manipulation. When I finished, Mrs. Steele folded her hands carefully. "We can go after him aggressively. Infidelity, misuse of marital assets, emotional abuse, we have leverage." I shook my head. "I don't want a war." She studied me quietly. "I just want out before he realizes I stopped loving him," I whispered. "Because once he loses control, he'll try to destroy me." Mrs. Steele nodded slowly like she understood exactly the kind of man Leo was, so we prepared the paperwork. And for the first time in years, signing my name felt empowering instead of suffocating. When I returned to the penthouse, I began packing. Not everything. Only what still felt like mine. My clothes, my sketchbooks, my grandmother's quilt, my favorite books. The expensive jewelry Leo bought after forgotten anniversaries stayed behind untouched in velvet boxes. Those gifts had never been apologies. They were transactions. I hired movers that afternoon. By the time they finished, the penthouse looked strangely hollow, not empty, but incomplete, like a showroom nobody actually lived in. I sat quietly on the white leather sofa with my suitcase beside me and waited. Leo came home around 6:30, speaking loudly through his headset. He barely noticed the missing boxes at first. That's how little attention he paid to me now. Then he saw the suitcase. His forehead creased. "What's this?" he asked. "Are you going somewhere?" I stood slowly. "I'm leaving Leo." He laughed immediately, a short, dismissive bark. "What, for a trip?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm leaving you. You'll be served divorce papers tomorrow morning." His entire expression darkened. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke." His jaw tightened. Then I said the one thing he wasn't expecting. "I know about Vanessa." The silence that followed felt electric. I watched his face carefully. Shock, calculation, anger, but not guilt, never guilt. Finally, he scoffed. "So what, you're throwing away 8 years over a fling?" "It wasn't a fling," I replied. "You told her you were planning your exit strategy. You called me dead weight." For the first time, he flinched, only slightly. Then came the attack. "You went through my computer," he snapped, stepping toward me. "That's a violation of privacy, Isabel. What the hell is wrong with you?" There it was, the familiar manipulation. Turn the victim into the offender. But something inside me had changed overnight. I didn't shrink this time. "I'm done, Leo," I said quietly. That seemed to unsettle him more than screaming would have. He stared at me, confused, waiting for tears, waiting for begging, waiting for emotion he could control. I gave him nothing. "You can't survive without me," he said, voice rising. "You have no real career, no serious money. You'll come crawling back within a month." I picked up my suitcase. "Watch me." As I walked past him, he grabbed for my arm. I stepped back immediately. "Don't touch me." The firmness in my voice startled both of us. He froze. I reached the front door. "Why aren't you fighting for this?" he shouted after me. "Why aren't you even upset?" I turned around one final time, and suddenly I saw him clearly. Not powerful, not brilliant, just small. A man so desperate to feel important that he drained the life from anyone who loved him. "Because the man I married disappeared a long time ago," I said. "And honestly, Leo, I think I left long before today." Then I closed the door behind me. And this time, I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I was driving a rental truck away from the city. The skyline disappeared slowly in my rearview mirror along with the penthouses, expensive dinners, forced smiles, and years of pretending. I didn't really have a plan, just enough savings to survive for a while. Then I remembered my grandmother's cottage in Little Brook Harbor. She had left it to me when she passed. Leo hated the place instantly, pressured me for years to sell it, but I never did. Some instinct deep inside me refused. Maybe part of me always knew I'd need somewhere to run when my life finally cracked open. The drive stretched for hours. Concrete highways slowly gave way to winding coastal roads lined with towering pine trees. The farther I drove, the easier it became to breathe. I rolled down the window and inhaled salt air for the first time in years. By late afternoon, I reached Little Brook Harbor. The town looked untouched by time. One quiet main street, a bakery, a hardware store, tiny diner with a flickering neon sign, no skyscrapers, no endless traffic. I followed the narrow cliffside road until the cottage finally appeared. It was small and weathered, with faded yellow paint and an overgrown garden fighting its way through cracked stone borders. But behind it stretched the Pacific Ocean, vast, endless, alive. I stepped out of the truck and listened carefully. No phones ringing, no Leo, only wind through the trees and waves crashing against the cliffs below. And for the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful instead of lonely. I found the spare key exactly where Grandma always kept it, beneath a loose stone near the porch steps. The lock resisted at first, stiff with age and sea air, but eventually it turned. The front door creaked open slowly. The cottage smelled like dust, cedarwood, and faded lavender. White sheets covered the furniture like sleeping ghosts, and for a moment I simply stood there listening to the silence. The kitchen still had the old yellow tiles. The living room still held the stone fireplace where Grandma used to roast marshmallows. Nothing had changed, and somehow that comforted me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tense walking through my own home. I didn't have to brace myself for criticism about my clothes, my cooking, or the tone of my voice. There was nobody here to disappoint, only me, and strangely, that felt safe. The first few days were spent cleaning. I scrubbed years of dust from the floors, washed the salt-streaked windows, and pulled down heavy curtains to let sunlight pour through the rooms again. The physical exhaustion helped. At night, my muscles ached, but it was an honest ache, earned, grounding, real. I slept upstairs in the small bedroom facing the ocean. Every night I left the window cracked open so I could hear the waves crashing against the cliffs below. That sound became my lullaby. My phone stayed mostly silent. I blocked Leo. Then Vanessa. The only person I regularly spoke to was my lawyer. "Leo's furious," Mrs. Steele told me during one call. "He's trying to move money around and hide assets, and apparently he's telling people you had some kind of breakdown." I laughed softly. Let him talk. And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Slowly, I started rediscovering simple things. I woke with the sunrise instead of an alarm. One afternoon, I found my grandmother's old gardening gloves in the shed and decided to tackle the jungle that had once been her garden. Buried beneath wild ivy and weeds, I discovered her rose bushes. They looked nearly dead, but not completely. I carefully cut away the choking vines, trimmed the brittle branches, and loosened the hardened soil around the roots. "You're going to survive," I whispered to the roses one evening. Then I smiled faintly. "We both are." The people in Little Brook Harbor were kind in ways I had forgotten existed. Not performative kindness, not networking politeness, real kindness. Mrs. Huntingford, the baker from down the street, knocked on my door one morning carrying a warm loaf of sourdough wrapped in a towel. "Good to see someone living in the old Morrison place again," she said warmly. "And honey, you look too skinny. Eat." That was it. No invasive questions, no gossip disguised as concern, just kindness without conditions. I nearly cried after she left. One windy afternoon, I walked barefoot along the beach collecting sea glass. My hair was tangled from the wind. I wore no makeup, old jeans, and an oversized sweater stained with paint. At one point, I caught my reflection in a shallow tide pool, exhausted. There were dark circles beneath my eyes and lines of stress I didn't remember earning, but my eyes themselves looked different, clearer, stronger, alive. In the city, my reflection had always looked hollow, like someone trying very hard to disappear politely. Now there was something fierce staring back at me. I was alone, divorced, starting over at 36 with nothing but a weathered cottage and a handful of boxes. And yet, standing before that endless wild ocean, I realized something almost terrifying. I was happy, not completely healed, not fearless, but free, and freedom was worth everything. Eventually, reality returned. Freedom didn't pay bills. My savings would last a few months at best, and more than money, I needed purpose. I needed to remember who Isabel Morrison had been before becoming Leo's wife. So I updated my RSUM. I rebuilt my portfolio. I dusted off years of sketches Leo had once dismissed as amateur and impractical. Then one Monday morning, wearing my best blazer and a nervous smile, I walked into the offices of Spiral Creatives Designs, the largest interior design firm in the region. The building itself was beautiful. Cedar walls, towering glass windows, open drafting tables scattered with blueprints and fabric samples. It smelled like fresh coffee, sawdust, and creativity. The owner, Samuel Hayes, was in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and rough hands that suggested he actually built things himself instead of merely signing contracts. What struck me most was what he didn't notice. He didn't stare at my missing wedding ring. He didn't ask why I moved here. He didn't judge the fact I arrived in a rental truck. He only looked at my work. Samuel sat silently flipping through my portfolio while my pulse hammered in my throat. Every second stretched painfully long. Part of me expected him to say exactly what Leo always said. Cute, small, unimportant. Finally, he closed the folder and looked directly at me. "These are good," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "No, better than good. Your work has soul. You understand how light changes a room emotionally." The breath I released felt trapped for years. "Thank you," I whispered. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "We're overloaded with a coastal resort project down south," he said. "I need someone who can handle interiors without constant supervision." Then he smiled slightly. "When can you start?" "I can start today." And just like that, my new life began. Working at Spiral Creatives felt nothing like my old life in the city. Back there, success was performance. Expensive shoes. Knowing the right people. Here, the work itself mattered. Samuel treated me like an equal from day one. When I suggested widening a wall in a client's beach house to maximize natural ocean light, he studied the plans carefully before nodding. "That's brilliant, Isabel." 3 simple words, but hearing them nearly broke me. I locked myself in the office restroom afterward and cried quietly for 2 full minutes. Not because I was sad, because I had forgotten what respect felt like. My days slowly found rhythm. Work filled with sketches, textures, fabrics, and sunlight. Simple dinners at home while reading beside the fireplace. Weekends spent restoring the cottage piece by piece. As the house transformed, so did I. Painted the walls soft white to reflect the ocean light. Planted hydrangeas along the front path. Every repaired crack felt strangely personal, like rebuilding myself room by room. About 3 months after arriving, I stayed late at the office finalizing a lighting layout for a dining room renovation. Everyone else had gone home hours earlier. I was so focused I didn't hear Samuel approach until he placed a cardboard cup beside my elbow. "I saw your light on," he said. "Thought you might need reinforcement. Hot chocolate." I blinked up at him, surprised enough to laugh. "Thank you. You're doing excellent work," he said casually, leaning against the doorway. "Clients trust you quickly. That's rare." I smiled faintly. "I know what it feels like not to be heard," I admitted. Samuel studied me quietly for a moment, but unlike most people, he didn't pry. Didn't ask invasive questions about my divorce. Didn't try to rescue me, he simply nodded. "Well," he said gently, "we're lucky to have you." Then he pointed toward the windows. "And for the record, ocean air is healthier than fluorescent lighting. Don't stay too late." After he left, I sat alone holding the warm cup between my hands, feeling something unfamiliar bloom quietly in my chest. Not romance, not yet, something safer. Respect. Leo had spent years convincing me I was incapable without him, that the world would devour me if I ever stood alone. But he had been wrong about me all along. I was paying my own bills, building my own life. One Saturday afternoon, after repainting the cottage's front door a deep ocean blue, I stepped back to admire it. Paint streaked my cheek. Dirt covered my hands. My hair looked ridiculous. I liked the woman staring back at me in the window reflection. She looked capable, strong, real. Then I realized something else. I hadn't thought about Leo in 3 whole days. 6 months after I left the city, the phone call came. Tracy, an old friend from my former social circle, a woman who treated gossip like a competitive sport. "Isabel?" she practically shrieked through the phone. "Oh my God, have you heard?" I was outside pruning rose bushes and calmly set the phone on speaker atop the stone wall. "Heard what? Leo and that assistant are getting married?" The pruning shears paused midair. I waited for the pain. For jealousy, nothing came. "When?" I asked evenly. "Next Saturday at Easton Hall in New York. Black tie, celebrity chef, ice sculptures, the works. Everyone's calling it the wedding of the year." "That sounds expensive," I murmured. Tracy went silent for half a beat, clearly disappointed by my lack of devastation. "That's all you're going to say? Isabel, he's replacing you publicly." I snipped another dead branch. "He can do whatever he wants, Tracy. He stopped being my problem a long time ago." Lowering her voice dramatically, she added, "Honestly, people are saying he looks off. Like he's trying too hard to prove he's happy, but Vanessa's acting like she won the lottery." "I have to go," I said calmly. "I've got work to finish." After hanging up, I stood quietly in the garden while ocean wind cooled the sweat at the back of my neck. Somewhere in New York, Leo was preparing for another performance, another audience to impress. He was probably spending a fortune trying to convince the world he had won. I realized something he still didn't understand. Freedom doesn't look impressive from the outside, but once you've tasted it, nothing else compares. Standing there in the garden surrounded by blooming roses and salt air, I understood something with complete certainty. Leo hadn't won anything. He was simply repeating the cycle. Men like him always needed an audience, someone to validate them, someone willing to mistake arrogance for strength. Vanessa was just the newest person cast in the role, and honestly, I pitied her. The day of their wedding arrived bright and clear. I knew exactly what was happening hundreds of miles away at Easton Hall in New York. It was 5 o'clock there. Guests were gathering beneath crystal chandeliers, while string music floated through polished marble halls. Leo was probably adjusting his cufflinks in front of a mirror, obsessing over every detail, making sure he looked successful enough to impress an entire room full of strangers. Meanwhile, in Little Brook Harbor, it was 2 in the afternoon, and instead of crying over my ex-husband's wedding, I went hiking. There was a trail north of town that climbed along the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. It was steep, uneven, and exhausting in the best possible way. I climbed steadily, my breathing falling into rhythm with each step. When I finally reached the summit, the view stole the air from my lungs. I sat on a large stone and drank water from my canteen while the wind whipped through my hair. For a moment, I imagined the wedding, the suffocating ballroom, the forced smiles, the quiet gossip hidden beneath expensive laughter, the exhausting pressure to appear perfect. Then I opened my eyes again and looked out at the ocean. Up there, nobody expected anything from me. I didn't have to impress anyone. I didn't have to perform. I simply existed. And that felt sacred. The wind carried my voice away as I whispered softly, "I release you." The words surprised me with their weight. "I release you, Leo. You can't hurt me anymore." I stayed on the cliff until sunset painted the sky purple, orange, and gold. It was more beautiful than any wedding centerpiece money could buy. That night, I returned home, made myself herbal tea, and fell asleep beside the fireplace with a book resting on my chest. I didn't dream about Leo once. That was when I realized something important about healing. Indifference isn't dramatic. It isn't rage. It isn't revenge. It's quiet. It's the absence of weight, like finally setting down a burden you carried so long you forgot life could feel lighter without it. I no longer cared whether Leo was happy or miserable, and that freedom terrified me a little, because it meant he no longer mattered. Of course, I wasn't at the wedding, but in the age of social media, nobody needs an invitation to witness a disaster. Ironically, the full story came to me through Henry Pattinson. Henry had been a close friend of my grandmother's, a retired attorney in his 70s, with sharp humor, expensive suspenders, and absolutely no patience for arrogant people. He'd also known Leo's father years earlier through business circles, which was apparently enough to earn him an invitation to the wedding. A week later, Henry arrived at my cottage carrying lemonade and looking far too entertained for a man his age. "You should have seen it, Isabel," he announced while settling into a porch chair. "Absolute theater," I laughed. "That bad?" "Oh, much worse." Henry took a long sip of lemonade before continuing. "The whole thing was absurdly extravagant. Ice sculptures, towers of shrimp, imported flowers flown in from Europe. Leo was strutting around like he'd personally invented success. And Vanessa," he snorted. "That girl kept waving her ring around like she'd won the Olympics." Henry leaned forward conspiratorially. I was seated near the head table. Leo gave the speech about finally finding his equal. Henry rolled his eyes dramatically. He kept making these little comments about leaving the past behind and finding someone who matched his ambition. "Classic Leo," I muttered. "Exactly," Henry replied. And frankly, it irritated me. His expression sharpened slightly. "I knew how he treated you. I knew you walked away with dignity while he paraded around pretending he upgraded his life." "So what did you do?" I asked carefully. Henry's grin widened. "Well, later in the evening, after everyone had enough champagne to become nosy, I walked over to congratulate him. There were investors standing around," Henry continued. Vanessa clinging to his arm, perfect audience. He paused for dramatic effect. So I said, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Congratulations, Leo. Impressive recovery after losing such a fortune." I nearly choked on my lemonade. "What did he say?" Henry burst into laughter. He looked completely confused, said, "I didn't lose anything. I kept the penthouse. I kept the accounts." And then, Henry said smugly, "I informed him he clearly hadn't done his homework." I stared at him. "Oh, Henry," he lifted a finger. "No regrets." Then he continued. "I told him the worthless cottage you inherited sits on 5 acres of newly rezoned coastal property now approved for luxury development." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Oh, yes," Henry said calmly. "And apparently, because Leo rushed through the divorce trying to protect his assets, he never bothered reviewing the updated trust valuations your grandmother left behind." "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Isabel, between the land, investments, and trust appreciation," he whistled softly. "You're worth several times more than Leo now." For a moment, I genuinely couldn't speak. I knew the property had sentimental value. I had no idea it carried financial value too. "You should have seen Leo's face," he continued. "Completely pale, like someone unplugged him. And Vanessa," Henry barked out a laugh. "That girl looked like she was doing math in real time." I covered my mouth trying not to laugh. "Oh no, oh yes." Henry shook his head. One of the investors immediately asked him, "You let that portfolio walk away?" I laughed so hard tears filled my eyes, not because of the money, but because the irony felt almost poetic. Leo had spent years assigning value to human beings based on status, money, and appearances, and in the end, his obsession with wealth blinded him to everything real. Suddenly, the story changed. He wasn't the powerful businessman upgrading his life anymore. He became the fool who threw away a diamond while chasing glitter. I sat quietly after that, staring toward the ocean while wind rustled through the rose bushes. "I didn't even know," I admitted softly. "That," Henry replied gently, "is exactly why you won." I looked at him. "You never played his game, Isabel. You just rebuilt your life while he stayed trapped inside his own ego." But apparently, the universe wasn't finished humiliating Leo yet, because the real disaster happened after the reception. According to Henry, someone at the wedding had recorded the moment Leo finally cracked under pressure. The video went viral. I watched it at work during my lunch break. The title read, "CEO Meltdown at His Own Wedding." The footage was shaky and loud. Leo stood near the bar screaming at a waiter because the wine served was the wrong vintage. Everything inside him was unraveling publicly. His face was red with rage. A crystal glass shattered against the wall behind him as guests stared in stunned silence. "Do you know who I am?" he shouted. "I'm the one in charge here. Everyone listens to me." In the background, Vanessa reached for his arm, visibly embarrassed. "Leo, stop." He shoved her hand away violently. "Get off me. You're just as useless as the rest of them." The room fell silent. Even through the screen, I could feel the horror spreading across the crowd. 2 million views, thousands of comments. This guy manages money? Terrifying. Imagine marrying him. The mask slipped. For years, Leo carefully crafted the image of a calm, powerful executive. 30 seconds destroyed it. And unlike personal scandals, financial industries survive on trust. A man publicly screaming at staff and humiliating his bride didn't look stable. He looked dangerous. By Wednesday, major clients began quietly withdrawing accounts from his firm. By Friday, the board requested his resignation for personal reasons. And just like that, the empire Leo built on control began collapsing in public. Leo was fired 3 days later. Then came the phone calls. My phone started ringing early Saturday morning from a number I didn't recognize. I knew it was him immediately. I let the first call go to voicemail. Then came another, and another. By the 6th call, I answered. I didn't speak at first. I just listened. Isabel, his voice sounded rough and uneven. Drunk, desperate. Please don't hang up. I closed my eyes briefly and leaned back against the sofa. What do you want, Leo? A long silence followed. Then he exhaled shakily. It's all gone. They fired me, he laughed bitterly. After everything I did for that company. I'm sorry to hear that, I said honestly. And strangely enough, I meant it. Not because I wanted him back, but because watching someone self-destruct is tragic, even when they helped create the fire. Vanessa left yesterday, he whispered. I stared quietly at the ocean outside my window while rain tapped softly against the glass. She packed a bag and walked out, said she didn't sign up for this, said I embarrassed her. I'm sure that hurt. A broken sound escaped him, not anger this time, grief, real grief. I made a mistake, Isabel. His breathing became shaky. A huge mistake. Then finally, after all these years, he said the truth out loud. You were the only person who ever actually loved me. I stayed silent. Weren't you? He asked weakly. You loved me before the money, before all of it. Yes, I answered softly. I did. The confession hung between us for several seconds. Then I added, but that version of me doesn't exist anymore. He started crying openly after that. Not elegant movie tears, ugly ones. The kind pulled from panic and loneliness. We can fix this, he said desperately. I can come there. We can start over. We could build something together again. You have the property, the money, your design business. There it was. The real reason, not love, need. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was drowning. And he wanted me to become his life raft again. I looked around my cottage. The warm, honey-colored floors. The fire crackling softly in the hearth. Kevin asleep beside my chair. Peace filled every corner of my life now, and suddenly I understood something clearly. I had spent years confusing love with rescue. Leo, I said gently, you don't need me. His breathing caught. You need to learn how to survive without someone carrying you. Don't do this, he snapped suddenly. The anger returned instantly, just beneath the sadness like it had always been waiting there. You owe me, Isabel, I made you. I almost smiled at that, because once upon a time those words would have shattered me. Now they just sounded sad. No, I said quietly. I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. That's not the same thing. Silence. Goodbye, Leo. And this time, when I hung up, I blocked the number without hesitation. The silence afterward felt enormous, but not empty, peaceful. For years, Leo had existed in my mind like some towering force I could never escape. But now, he was just a lonely man sitting in a dark apartment thousands of miles away with nobody left to blame for his unhappiness. The monster had never been powerful. I had simply spent years feeding it pieces of myself. It's been a year since the wedding disaster. Life in Littlebrook Harbor has settled into something quiet and beautiful. I became a partner at Spiral Creative Designs 6 months ago. The sign outside now reads, Hayes and Morrison Design. Sometimes I still stop and stare at it when I unlock the office each morning. Samuel and I work side by side almost every day. And while people in town love to speculate, the truth is simpler than gossip. He's become one of the healthiest relationships I've ever had with a man. No games, no control, no shrinking myself to protect his ego, just mutual respect. And honestly, that still feels revolutionary to me. I used part of my inheritance to create a scholarship fund for young women pursuing interior design. I didn't want the money sitting untouched in accounts. I wanted it to become opportunity, to become freedom for someone else, too. The garden at the cottage is thriving now. The roses that once struggled beneath tangled weeds climb proudly across the stone walls, strong, wild, impossible to ignore. Sometimes I stand there looking at them and laugh at how obvious the metaphor became. And yes, I adopted a dog. A ridiculously oversized golden retriever named Kevin, who follows me from room to room like a furry shadow and refuses to let me work alone. He sleeps at my feet every night while rain crashes against the cliffs outside. I still hear updates about Leo occasionally through old acquaintances. He sold the penthouse. Vanessa filed for an annulment. He relocated to another city and took a smaller corporate job far away from the circles where he once mattered. Ironically, he ended up living the exact life he used to threaten me with: ordinary, quiet, forgettable. But the strangest part is this: I don't feel satisfaction about it. I don't sit around celebrating his downfall. Most days, I barely think about him at all, because revenge isn't healing. Revenge keeps you emotionally chained to the person who hurt you. Real healing is waking up one morning and realizing your first thought no longer belongs to them. Real healing is making coffee in a peaceful kitchen and liking the person staring back at you in the window reflection. This morning, I stood on my porch wrapped in a sweater while waves crashed violently against the cliffs below. The wind tangled my hair across my face. I am 37 years old, divorced, living alone in a weathered cottage at the edge of the ocean, and I have never felt more complete. I didn't destroy Leo's life. I simply stopped saving it. And the moment I stepped away, everything he built on control collapsed under its own weight. I lifted my coffee toward the sea and smiled. Sometimes the quietest revenge is finally choosing yourself. And honestly, that kind of freedom is priceless. If you suspect your husband is taking secret trips with another woman, or if he or any of your family makes you feel small so they can feel big, remember this: you do not need to set yourself on fire to keep the family warm. You do not need to be the draft horse. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is unplug the castle, walk out the front door, and never look back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today, so leave a comment below and tell me what you thought about the ending.